Hi, I'm Susan Wilson, and this is History Tidbits, cool things you probably didn't know. We're standing on the edge of the Boston Common. Boston was founded as a town in 1630, and only 4 years later, they established Boston Common as a common place for people to do whatever they needed to do, graze their cows, beat their rugs, protest, just all the basics. By 1874, when Dr. Susan Dimock was actively working in Greater Boston and working as the resident physician of the New England Hospital for Women and Children, she could come down to the Common, and there are some things that are similar and some things that aren't. For example, when she was here walking on the Common in 1874, there were no cows on the Common, because even though they've been allowed there for almost 2 centuries, by 1830 they decided, nah, maybe not so good. We don't want to have to do the cleanup. We don't want to have the problem. So cows were banned from the Common. Things that were still here, though, was the great elm, which predated the Common and was probably planted sometime in the late 1500s or early 1600s, or not even planted, grew. That was still here, although 2 years later it blew down in a storm. Now what's interesting is, if you look up the hill, you'll see the gold dome of the Massachusetts State House. This is the new State House, which opened in 1798. Probably only in Boston is the new State House that old, 1798. The old State House was more than a century older than that. What's interesting is we associate the gold dome with our State House, but it was only that year, 1874, that the gold dome of the State House, that the dome was actually painted with gilt, that it was made gold. The dome was there when they first opened in 1798, but first it was just wood and painted a lead black. By 1802, they realized there weren't a lot of trucks. There weren't a lot of trucks here when Susan Dimock was here in 1874. Anyway, in 1802, they realized that was wearing very badly, and so a local magnate who had a copper factory, sheet copper factory down in Canton, covered it with copper. This was Paul Revere, major industrial revolutionary, so his company covered that with copper, and that's what it continued to be until 1874, when they put the gold on it, and we've had it regilded ever since. But she would have been here to see that new gilding. Now, the other very exciting thing for someone like Susan Dimock, who was a pioneer, who was a woman doing what women were not supposed to be doing, being a doctor, a surgeon, whatever. Right behind me, roughly where these red doors are, where the Paulus Center is now, were the headquarters of what was named the Woman's Journal. This was a big deal. After the Civil War ended, many women who had gotten out of the private sphere and moved into the public sphere because they were involved in abolitionism, were involved in nurses' aid during the Civil War, and had been out and about outside of their homes, okay? Many of them focused on the right to vote, on suffrage. And Lucy Stone, who was a founder of the Women's Journal, set up her headquarters here on 3 to 5 Park Street. The building is no longer there, but it was roughly that area. The Women's Journal became the most important voice of the women's movement. And the Women's Journal supported everything that women were doing. I mean, women were doing amazing things. First of all, Susan was working at the first hospital in New England that was run by women doctors for women. A woman named Ellen Swallow became the first student at MIT. There were this local writer who had been writing Blood and Thunder stories and articles was a best-selling author. That would be Louisa May Alcott. So women were coming into their own. There were many other women's enterprises, but the Women's Journal supported all of those. And so Susan Dimock would have known her, would have been supported by her, and that's the Park Street Church ringing congratulations for this. So it was a great time. It was also a time, one of the local women of great strength was Julia Ward Howe, who we remember for writing the Battle Hymn of the Republic. But something that was happening when Susan Dimock was here was that in 1872, because of all the bloody wars that had come before, not only the Civil War but the Franco-Prussian War, Julia Ward Howe invented the first Mother's Day. It was called the Mother's Day for Peace. It was on June 2nd, And every year for almost a decade, it was celebrated here and then spread elsewhere as a practical thing for mothers saying, we don't want our husbands, our fathers, our sons, our brothers to go to war and die. There's got to be a better way. My feeling is maybe that should be brought back, an activist Mother's Day. That's your history tidbit for today.